I'd like to talk to you now about activation. Now, obviously, one of the things that's kind of important to Microsoft is that they get paid for their products, right? They have a huge, massive amount of people working for the company and building these operating systems, and of course, they like to get paid, right? And the way that they sort of try to make sure they get paid is through the help of activation. Now, activation was something that came out when Windows XP first came out. Prior to that, Microsoft didn't really do a lot of verification other than they might audit you as a company. They say Windows 98 at one point was the most pirated piece of software in history, or the most pirated operating system by far in history. And well, the problem with that was is you'd buy Windows 98, it would have a product key that you'd have to enter in, and then you could basically put that in 500 machines in your environment and activate or use that product key to get access to it, and away you went. In fact, even in the 90s, with even NT4, you could put in just all ones, and you could get past the product key screen. So this wasn't working too well for them in the beginning. So when Windows XP came out, they released the idea of activation. Okay, so activation makes it where we can take advantage of all the features of Windows. In the early days, you couldn't even use Windows unless you were activated. Microsoft is a lot more lenient on that now. Okay, so now if your operating system is not activated, mostly what ends up happening is you can't personalize things. Okay, so if I go right here, I can't personalize my background. I can't change wallpaper settings and all of that very easily. I can change my wallpaper settings if I right click a photo and say set it as wallpaper, but you'll notice here I can't go in here and alter any of these settings. I can't do any type of personalization settings or any of that unless I am activated. Okay, whereas in the early days you couldn't even use the operating system. It would reboot on you and everything else if you weren't completely activated. Okay, so Microsoft now mostly allows us to purchase their product. They give us a product key and then activate it. Now, how does exactly does that work? So Windows has a feature called WMI, which stands for Windows Management Instrumentation. WMI is a repository that keeps track of all of the ID numbers for everything that's happening on your computer. It keeps track of the serial number, your processor serial number, motherboard, all your different hardware components. It records the type, it records model numbers, serial numbers, it records the amounts of things like RAM, and all of that stuff gets recorded into this repository. And of course, then what happens is that takes those serial numbers and it registers the serial number of your motherboard and all that to your product key. So when you go and you activate with Microsoft, it's going to register that number with their cloud environment, essentially, involving your activation key. Okay, so how can I tell if I'm activated? Okay, so the graphical way, probably the easiest graphical way to tell if you're activated is to simply just type the word activation in here in the little search bar, and then it'll bring you can go to activation settings, and then you'll clearly see on the screen once this pops up whether or not you're activated. Okay. And of course, right now, this little virtual machine I'm using is not activated. So it's telling me, it says we can't activate on the Windows device as we can't connect to your organization's activation server. Okay. So what are they talking about when they say activation server? Let's talk about that. I'm going to throw a diagram up on the screen here that you've seen me draw previously, and we'll talk about sort of the back and forth of all that.